She thought she knew him, trusted him, loved him. But sometimes the people closest to you hide the darkest secrets, and sometimes the ones who seem to protect you are the ones leading you into danger. This is Amara, a woman who has faced subtle judgment, whispered insults, and the kind of cruelty that hides behind charm and influence. Her boyfriend seems perfect. Her best friend seems trustworthy. But beneath the surface lies a web of deception, manipulation, and betrayal. Tonight, she will confront the truth. Tonight, secrets will be exposed, and the world will see who he really is. This is her story of courage, betrayal, and justice. To know the full story, watch till the end, and if you like the video, then like, share, and subscribe. The first time Amara felt the weight of judgment, she didn't even enter the room. It was a high-end restaurant, one she had been invited to by David, her boyfriend, the white man she trusted with her heart. The hostess barely looked at her, giving a polite nod that didn't reach her eyes. But the stares from the other diners cut deeper than any words could. Whispers floated just out of hearing. Sharp glances followed her every step. Amara was a black woman used to invisible barriers, but nothing prepared her for this. Every inch of the room screamed that she didn't belong, and each laugh and smirk from the white patrons felt like confirmation. David, tall and impeccably dressed, was waiting at their table, completely unaware, or pretending to be, of the scrutiny she endured. When she reached him, he smiled warmly, but the tension in the room hadn't dissipated. The couple's differences were visible to everyone: skin, background, worldviews. And it seemed some were determined to make her feel out of place. The waitress approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Are you sure you're meeting someone here?" she asked, almost as if asking permission for Amara to exist in this space. Amara's chest tightened. She wanted to vanish, to dissolve into the shadows of the elegant room. But David, oblivious or arrogant, reached for her hand and said firmly, "She's with me." Still, the weight of eyes on her body, measuring, judging, mocking, pressed in. She could feel whispers brushing against her skin like invisible knives. Later that night, alone in her apartment, Amara's phone buzzed. It was Rachel, her best friend since childhood, a white woman who had always been outspoken, bold, and fiercely protective. But this message was different. "You need to keep your eyes open. Something's not right with David. Spy if you have to. You'll see what I mean." Amara stared at the screen, her chest tightening even more than it had at dinner. Spy on him? Her mind raced. Was this jealousy? Paranoia? Or had Rachel somehow seen a truth she hadn't yet faced? A small, terrified part of her whispered, maybe she should listen. Maybe Rachel was right. And if she followed this path, the truth she would uncover might destroy everything she thought she knew. The next morning, Amara sat at her kitchen counter, the first rays of sunlight hitting her face, illuminating the doubt and fear in her eyes. The weight of Rachel's words pressed on her shoulders. She didn't know it yet, but this single decision, to consider spying, to uncover what David was hiding, would set off a chain of events that could shatter lives, betrayals, and secrets, including her own. The question lingered in her mind, heavy and suffocating. Could she trust the man she loved, or the friend she had always believed would protect her? The city moved in its usual rhythm outside Amara's apartment. Cars honking, street vendors calling out, distant sirens wailing. But inside, the world felt smaller, heavier, and infinitely more personal. Amara poured herself a cup of tea and leaned against the counter. She was in her late 20s, tall and poised, with smooth dark skin and expressive eyes that always seemed to read more than she let on. She had grown up learning to navigate spaces where she was often the only black face in a sea of whiteness. Elegance, composure, and an ability to stay calm under scrutiny had been her armor. Rachel burst in through the door a few minutes later, as if the city itself had pressed her through the apartment door. Her blonde hair bounced, blue eyes wide with urgency, her energy overwhelming but reassuring. "You're thinking too much," Rachel said, dumping her bag on the couch. "I know dinner last night was rough, but this isn't over. David isn't what he seems." Amara sighed, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "I know you mean well," she said softly, "but I can't just assume he's bad. He's complicated." Rachel snorted. "Complicated? He's manipulating you. That restaurant incident wasn't subtle. That was calculated." The two had been inseparable since childhood. Rachel had always been loud, fearless, sometimes reckless. Amara had been quieter, more reflective. The combination had made them a balanced team. But now, for the first time in years, Amara felt the weight of distrust toward the man she loved and the friend she had always relied on. Across town, David's world was a polished illusion. To everyone else, he was the perfect gentleman, a charming businessman, a man who seemed untouchable. He moved through his circle with ease, greeting influential figures, laughing at the right jokes, projecting confidence. But beneath the smooth, surface lay secrets Amara was only beginning to uncover. Work added another layer of tension. Amara's boss had started making excuses, small but noticeable, subtly undermining her contributions. Opportunities she had earned were handed to others. Colleagues whispered behind her back, not maliciously, but with ignorance that still cut like a knife. She felt the familiar sting of exclusion, the subtle power of systemic bias. Rachel's warnings had not been empty. "Document everything," she urged. "Keep records, screenshots, videos. Don't trust memory alone. You'll need proof." Amara had hesitated at first. The idea of spying on someone she loved was painful, almost unbearable. But the more she observed, the more evidence of manipulation she discovered. Every lie, every hidden agenda, every subtle attempt to isolate her from allies became a thread she could follow, a map of truth that would one day vindicate her. One evening, after a humiliating presentation where David had taken credit for her work, Amara returned home, exhausted. She sank into her chair, staring at the small black USB drive she had purchased. Inside, it would store weeks of careful recordings, proof of deception, and the subtle cruelty that David hid behind charm. Rachel appeared on a video call, eyes serious. "You're ready," she said. "I know it's hard, but the longer you wait, the stronger he thinks he is. You have everything you need to act." Amara took a deep breath, letting the tension of weeks wash over her. Her heart pounded, not just from fear, but from resolve. The decision she had avoided for so long was now unavoidable. She glanced at the city skyline, the lights shimmering, like judgmental eyes. Somewhere in that glowing maze, David moved confidently, unaware of the storm about to hit, and Amara knew, finally, that the time for patience had passed. The weeks after the gala felt like walking through a minefield. Every interaction with David became a test of patience, endurance, and nerve. His charm remained flawless, but the cracks in his mask were visible to Amara, especially when she caught him in moments of subtle cruelty. It started at work. Emails that once contained praise now carried backhanded compliments or passive-aggressive corrections. A promotion she had worked toward for months was quietly reassigned to a white colleague who had contributed far less. Meetings she organized were either dismissed or overshadowed by David's presence. One morning, her assistant handed her an envelope with a note from David. "We need to discuss your presentation in my office, ASAP." Amara entered, tense. David's smile was warm, almost disarming. "Amara, your presentation. It's impressive, but the client seemed confused by your approach. Maybe next time we should handle it differently." Confused by the subtle dismissal, Amara realized he was publicly undermining her competence while appearing supportive. The humiliation stung, sharp and unfair, and she could feel the invisible walls closing in. At the same time, she encountered microaggressions everywhere she went. At lunch, colleagues would roll their eyes at her suggestions, offer dismissive nods, or interrupt her mid-sentence. At networking events, she noticed whispers, quick glances, and the subtle assumption that she did not belong in those elite spaces. Rachel noticed the shift immediately. During one tense video call, she said firmly, "He's isolating you. He's making sure you're alone when he needs control. Amara, you need to fight this carefully, not emotionally. Gather proof." Amara's chest tightened. It wasn't just the office. Everywhere David's influence extended, the pressure followed. Social events she had been invited to were rescinded. Invitations disappeared without explanation. Even her closest acquaintances seemed to change their demeanor when David was present, as if conditioned by his charm to dismiss her. One evening, she attended a client dinner with David. The room was filled with affluent white professionals who barely concealed their disdain. As David flirted with the attention of the men and women at the table, he made a pointed joke about Amara's background. Subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone not paying attention, but cutting deeply. She clenched her fork, forcing herself to remain poised. The laughter around the table echoed like a chorus of judgment, and she realized just how carefully David had manipulated appearances. He was publicly charming, privately cruel, and she was trapped in the crossfire of his deception. Till when? Home, Amara's small apartment became her only refuge. She documented everything meticulously, emails, recordings, and her own observations. The hidden camera she had reluctantly installed weeks before now provided irrefutable proof of David's manipulation, his cold dismissal of her, and his plans to isolate her from allies. Rachel became her anchor, her voice of reason and strategy. "We're close," she said one night, scrolling through recordings on her laptop. "Every slight, every humiliation, it's all here. You're going to expose him, Amara. But timing is everything. Don't let anger make you reckless." But anger simmered beneath her composed exterior. One day, after David claimed her idea as his own during a meeting and the clients applauded him, Amara felt a surge of frustration she could barely contain. She left the room abruptly, her chest heaving, a mix of rage, hurt, and determination fueling every step. As she paced her apartment, she realized that every act of subtle discrimination, every stolen opportunity, every sneer and whispered insult had prepared her for this moment. She had the evidence, she had the courage, and she had the resolve to confront the deception publicly. Yet, the fear remained. Could she truly stand up to someone as charismatic and powerful as David? Could the world believe her when he had cultivated an image of charm and perfection? Her phone buzzed. It was Rachel. "Tomorrow is the day. Don't let him control the narrative. Expose everything. You're ready." Amara's fingers hovered over the small black USB drive she had been clutching all week. The weight of it was symbolic, proof, power, and the truth she had fought to uncover. She took a deep breath, letting the tension of weeks wash over her. Every slight, every whispered insult, every microaggression had been a rehearsal. The rising action of her life, the harassment, the humiliation, and the systemic bias had led her to this point. The question remained, heavy and unavoidable. When she confronted him publicly, would the world finally see him as he truly was? Or would his charm still shield him from the consequences of his actions? The grand ballroom glittered under chandeliers, golden light bouncing off crystal glasses and polished marble floors. The city's elite had gathered for another gala, David's stage, the perfect place for him to charm, manipulate, and control perception. But tonight, everything was about to change. Amara's heels clicked purposefully against the floor as she entered, clutching the small black USB drive in her purse. The evidence she had painstakingly collected, the emails, the recordings, the moments of subtle cruelty and manipulation, was finally ready to speak for her. David stood at the center, perfectly composed, laughing with white businessmen and socialites. His smile was practiced, flawless. But when his eyes landed on Amara, it faltered for a brief, nearly imperceptible second. Rachel appeared at Amara's side, her hand brushing hers. "You ready?" she whispered. Amara swallowed, nodding. "Let's end this," the whispers began. As she stepped closer to the stage, the room sensing the shift before anyone understood why, all eyes turned to the black woman standing at the edge of the spotlight. The tension was electric. David's charm faltered as he noticed the determination in her gaze. "Amara," he said, voice slightly strained, microphone picking up the syllable. She lifted her chin. "You've lied. You've manipulated. You've humiliated me and others. And tonight, the world will see who you truly are." Gasps spread through the crowd. Phones were lifted instinctively, cameras capturing every second. Rachel tapped a tablet, connecting it to the projector behind the stage. Screens flickered to life, and the recordings played. David's voice filled the room, smug, mocking, cruel. He spoke of bribes, manipulation, and his belief that Amara was replaceable. The audience recoiled. Gasps turned to murmurs of outrage. Faces went pale. Even those who had trusted David couldn't ignore what they were seeing. David lunged forward, fury in his eyes. "This is a lie! This is manipulation!" he shouted. But his words lacked the power to silence the evidence. Another recording played, this one showing David accepting envelopes of cash, agreements with business partners. The coldness of his schemes laid bare. There was no denying it. Security moved in as David tried to approach the stage, his once perfect image crumbling under the weight of truth. He struggled, shouted, and raged, but the audience was no longer fooled. His power evaporated in real time, replaced by humiliation and exposure. Amara stood tall, the culmination of weeks of harassment, humiliation, and systemic unfairness finally validated. She didn't need to speak further. The evidence had spoken for her. Rachel's hand found hers again, a silent affirmation. Together, they watched as David's empire of charm and deceit unraveled in front of the city's most influential people. The reporters scrambled, capturing the fall, and the gala, once a symbol of celebration for him, became a spectacle of justice. The storm of flashes, voices, and chaos did not break Amara. It empowered her. She had endured weeks of microaggressions, stolen recognition, and public slights. Tonight, she reclaimed her narrative. As David was escorted away, faces turned to Amara in admiration and respect. Whispers of courage, strength, and finally circulated, validating her ordeal and resilience. She exhaled deeply, feeling a liberation that no social circle, wealth, or charm could have given her. She had faced the manipulator, exposed the truth, and emerged unbroken, stronger, wiser, and fully seen. And in the quiet moments that followed, as cameras still flashed and the crowd murmured, Amara realized something profound. She wasn't just reclaiming her dignity. She was setting a precedent, a message that manipulation, cruelty, and discrimination would not go unchecked. That courage and truth could dismantle even the most polished facades. She turned to Rachel, eyes glistening, and whispered, "We did it." Rachel smiled, proud and exhausted. "No, you did it. You never let him win." For the first time in weeks, Amara allowed herself a small, victorious smile. The climax wasn't just a confrontation, it was a transformation. And as the gala descended into chaos, the world watching, Amara knew this was the beginning of a new chapter. Not just for her, but for anyone who had ever been silenced, underestimated, or dismissed. The question now wasn't about survival. It was about power, truth, and the legacy she would leave. The chaos of the gala faded, but its echoes lingered, reverberating, through social circles, offices, and media outlets. Headlines screamed her name. Black woman exposes businessman's deception. Elite gala turns into public reckoning. Courage triumphs over cruelty. Amara hadn't sought fame, but the world had watched as her courage dismantled the polished facade of David's charm. Returning home, the city lights reflected in her apartment windows, Amara felt an unfamiliar lightness. Weeks of fear, anger, and humiliation had culminated in a single moment of triumph. She allowed herself to breathe fully, realizing she had reclaimed her narrative, her dignity, and her power. Work shifted dramatically. Colleagues who had once whispered and dismissed her now approached with respect. Opportunities that had been blocked before were reopened, and new doors appeared. The corporate world had seen her strength, and her voice now carried weight. The subtle biases that had once constrained her began to lose their power in her presence. David's fall was swift. Legal investigations ensued. Partners severed ties. Assets were frozen. He became a cautionary tale, proof that charm and influence could not shield cruelty and manipulation indefinitely. Yet Amara didn't feel triumph in revenge. She felt a deeper satisfaction. Justice had been served, and truth had prevailed. Rachel remained by her side, their friendship now deeper than ever. The trust between them had been tested and forged in fire. Rachel had been the one to warn her, to guide her, to provide unwavering support in moments when doubt could have consumed her. Together, they celebrated quiet victories, laughter over coffee, long walks in the city, late-night conversations about life, resilience, and ambition. The months that followed were transformative. Amara became an inadvertent mentor to others, speaking at conferences, panels, and workshops about courage, integrity, and the importance of standing up against manipulation. She shared her story of evidence, documentation, and careful strategy, not as a template for revenge, but as a blueprint for empowerment. Women, particularly Black women, found inspiration in her experience, realizing that even in spaces designed to marginalize them, strength and strategy could reclaim control. Even beyond professional success, Amara found personal peace. She had confronted betrayal, systemic unfairness, and microaggressions that had haunted her for years. And in doing so, she had discovered an inner strength she had never fully acknowledged. Her life, once constrained by fear of judgment and manipulation, now expanded with possibility. Yet, the journey had left subtle marks. She remained cautious, discerning whom to trust, aware of the duplicity people could hide behind charm and influence. But this awareness no longer paralyzed her. Instead, it sharpened her instincts, giving her clarity in decisions, relationships, and ambitions. One evening, sitting by her balcony with the city sprawling beneath her, Amara reflected on the months that had passed. The skyline glittered, each light a small reminder that the world was watching, and that courage could illuminate even the darkest corners. She thought of David, whose arrogance and cruelty had been his undoing. There was no joy in his defeat, only a quiet satisfaction that truth had finally been recognized. Her phone buzzed with messages of support. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers thanking her for her bravery. Each message reinforced the idea that individual courage could inspire collective change. The ripple effects of her actions reached far beyond the walls of the ballroom, the office, and her apartment. Amara's relationship with Rachel remained a cornerstone of her life. The two women, from different backgrounds and perspectives, had created an unshakable bond. Their combined courage and loyalty had been instrumental in exposing David, and it served as a reminder that true friendship could transcend fear, social expectations, and even betrayal. In her professional life, Amara's story became an emblem of integrity and resilience. She was consulted on projects requiring leadership, vision, and courage under pressure. Her perspective, once marginalized, was now celebrated. Colleagues sought her advice, and she guided them with a blend of empathy and strategic thinking. But beyond accolades and recognition, the most profound change was internal. Amara no longer measured her worth by others' perceptions. She had learned that dignity, self-respect, and courage were her own, independent of validation or social standing. The injustices she had faced no longer defined her. They had refined her, shaping a stronger, wiser, and more self-assured individual. Months later, the city had moved on. Headlines shifted, scandals emerged, and new faces dominated social events. Yet, for Amara, the lessons endured. She had confronted betrayal and injustice, exposed manipulation, and reclaimed her narrative. Her courage had created ripples that would inspire others for years to come. Standing on her balcony, looking out at the skyline, she whispered to herself, "I am not invisible. I am not powerless. I am seen, I am heard, and I will never be silenced again." And with that, Amara understood a fundamental truth. Bravery, integrity, and strategy could dismantle even the most polished facades. Her story was more than personal. Vindication. It was a beacon for anyone who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or silenced. Her journey had begun with doubt, fear, and betrayal. It had escalated through harassment, humiliation, and systemic bias. It had climaxed in public, confrontation, revealing truth and justice, and it concluded with empowerment, recognition, and the knowledge that courage could transform lives, not just her own, but everyone who witnessed her resolve. Amara's life was no longer defined by the injustices she endured. It was defined by the power she reclaimed, the friendships that endured, and the legacy of courage she created.